Hello, everyone. My name is Jason Miles, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. As you can see, I am on location. The Santa Ana winds have kicked up once again, and they've kicked up furiously where I live, and they're due to get even worse right now. So I took a bus to Tijuana, and this is the quietest place I could be at. I'm sure you don't believe me. It's quiet in the sense that there's not people around. They get like weirded out when they see some guy talking into the computer, which you would think would be normalized in 2025. Not as normal as you think. Um, for those that thought I was going to do the show at the Vampire Goth Bar, way too loud there. Would love to do a show there. It's just too damn loud, and it's nighttime too. Hella loud. But for those new to the show, welcome. Usually, there's not this much reggaeton playing in the back whenever we do our thing. Um, Welcome for the returning listeners, subscribers, and our very valued patrons. Fuck yeah. So glad you guys are here. Let's just get right into the topic at hand. Kids these days. The trope of older generations disparaging the youth for their perceived lack of resilience or work ethic is a reoccurring narrative in history. From the vantage point of the younger end of Generation X, I recall being labeled a slacker, indulging in the comforts of 64-bit video games, MTV, shopping malls, and rap music. Yet this framing, while dismissing the cultural shifts of my time, misses a key point. Societal conditions and structural forces shape each generation's behaviors and aspirations. Are these critiques of laziness merely projections of nostalgia, or do they reveal the mechanisms by which capitalism commodifies leisure, labor, and even education? Today, technology grants near instant gratification. Food, transportation, or even companionship are available with a swipe. This immediacy, while convenient, reflects deeper dynamics of consumer culture, a system designed to fulfill desires quickly to perpetuate consumption. In this world, we are Veruca Salt characters constantly demanding satisfaction, or are we participants in a system that normalizes alienation and instant rewards as substitutes for meaningful engagement? This is really hard to do with this music in the background. I just want you guys to know that. Education, too, has not been spared from commodification. Initiatives like No Child Left Behind and Common Core, emphasizing standardized testing and efficiency, have restructured learning to prioritize measurable outcomes over critical thinking or engagement with complex texts. As The Atlantic noted, fewer high school students read entire books, their curricula fragmented into excerpts, videos, quick summaries. This reflects a broader trend, the subsumption of intellectual labor under the logic of capital, where knowledge becomes just another commodity. From a recent article in The Atlantic, in a recent Ed Week Research Center survey of about 300 third to eighth grade educators, only 17% said they primarily teach whole texts. An additional 49% combine whole text with analogies and excerpts. But nearly a quarter of respondents said that books are no longer the center of their curricula. One public high school teacher in Illinois told me that she used to structure her classes around books, but now focuses on skills such as how to make good decisions. In a unit about leadership, students read parts of Homer's Odyssey and supplement it with music, articles, and TED Talks. An advanced placement English literature teacher in Atlanta told me that the class used to read 14 books each year. Now they're down to 6 or 7, unquote. So to what extent have we failed the youth with our education policy, or is this just the dawning of a new era and reading books is a thing of the past that is simply an obsolete way of learning? I think I have assembled a hell of a cast here. The guy that gave me this idea has arrived. He is my very good friend. He's like a younger brother with all of the benefits and none of the drawbacks. Bert Cooper.
What's up, Jason?
How are you?
I'm all right, man. Glad I can make it. I didn't know I was exactly the genesis of this. I mean, honestly, that tweet that went out that started the conversation with you and I did not expect.
You
Nobody
know, when
thinks
it's
about my
it,
education tweets. Like, no one
here,
ever
here,
thinks about those.
here's the thing, Bert Cooper. I'll be completely honest with you. I think you tweeted that on a Monday, and that is my booking day and work day. You could have tweeted anything on that Monday. You could have tweeted, "Hey, why don't strippers fucking sit on my lap anymore?" And that would have been the subject of the show. So Monday is my day for finding out, hey, I need a show, and there's only so many fucking books I can read in a month because I have 2 books this week.
I
So I too am
appreciate you
complaining.
letting the audience know about the rich creativity, the backdrop that goes into the production of the show. This is where the fuck gets on here on Monday. Whatever's popping on Monday, that's what's
Whatever,
going on.
what you got Monday? Oh, Bert Cooper said something interesting. That's what it is. Another man. So if Bert Cooper is my play little brother, this man is my play big brother. Much like Bert Cooper, all the benefits, none of the drawbacks. His name is Ray Reed.
Bert, how you doing,
Hey,
man?
man.
Haven't
I'm
seen
good.
you in
It's
a
been a
minute.
while. Yeah.
It looks like
Jason.
neither of us have been in the sun in a while.
You at least have the yellow light in your background. I know that's adding a shade or two for you.
Something. But
No,
I mean, I'm in cold ass Illinois. What's your excuse?
the fires kept me indoors.
Fires are a big
vacation about a week. No.
You can't breathe that shit in when those fires happen like that. If you start going outside like it's normal and you're not like masking or anything like that, you're gonna get sick. It's kind of inevitable.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I was
Well, I
out
won't
there.
channel the spirit of Homer Simpson and say you'd think that would have made you browner, but
Hasn't done me any favors yet. But I promise the summer's coming and I'll brown right up for you and the rest of Jason's fan base. Nice
and I'll be there with you, but in Illinois.
and to join us with this motley crew of education people, we recruited 2 people that weren't black, so white people would take the show seriously. So please welcome. It's only funny because it's true. Please welcome returning guest and scholar Daniel Moak.
And they told me a permanent bathroom was dead, but
yeah. Hey, it's alive and well tonight. And this person, when I put the show up, rarely do people hit me up when I actually put a show up. This person is a professor at Howard University, Antonio Levy. Hey,
Hi.
welcome, Tone. Can we call you Tone?
Sure.
Okay, your Tone tonight. You can be Antonio for the rest of your life, but esta noche, tú eres Tone.
You've been in Mexico how long?
Well, in Mexico, you can call me Toño.
Cuatro años. 2025 is 4 years. So first and foremost, I want to ask you guys, I want to get this out of the way. How many of you guys deal? I know Bert. I know you actually deal with high school students, but out of Tone, Daniel, and Teray, how many of you guys deal with freshmen? You guys all deal with freshmen. Do you think COVID affected their high school, the end of their high school years? Because you probably got them. What, they were freshmen or sophomores during COVID?
Well, I had some freshmen during the COVID lockdown year. And then I think from my vantage point, I don't know about anyone else, and I don't know if this is really addressing the question that you want to get to, but that first year wasn't that bad. The issues that students had seemed to be really emotional more than anything else. But as the years have progressed since the COVID lockdown, there seems to be a decline in the sensibilities and crucially more the skill sets that students come to us with.
Sorry, I tutor and work with a bunch of students, mostly at this point at schools that you would consider, upper class, upper middle, and a lot of those students, helping them with their essays. I mean, they're seniors now, but many of them were in middle school, for at least part of the pandemic, and they will tell you that their skills changed a lot. They won't use the term skills, but I've had a lot of students mention that once it was in full swing, student or teachers took off a lot of the guardrails. They were trying to be understanding of everyone, and there was just so much leniency in getting your work in, trying to manage, this unprecedented event. That when they were coming out of it, I've had a lot of students who just were. They will self-disclose. They hadn't done schedules in like a year. They hadn't been expected to turn many things on time. And to Tori's point about that sensibility, that kind of like voice in your head telling you are falling way behind and you've got to turn this in. And it's going to be like this weird, a lot of the fear around looking your teacher in the eye with like a late assignment, that got kind of pulled away during the pandemic, at least for a lot of the students I work with.
Yeah, that definitely I think would be the case with me. I should, in the interest of full disclosure, I didn't start teaching until 2022. So I'd been a postdoc until then, and it's a little bit of a different perspective in physics because of the strong cumulative nature. But I did notice a lot more of a tendency to memorize, and I do think that becomes very quickly, it just makes things a lot harder down the road. It hurts the, depth of which you can understand things. And, it helps you at the beginning, but then it very quickly makes it harder for you. And I noticed that, that tendency increasing, COVID increased it, but I think there was a, longer term nationwide towards that direction, I think, because of the proliferation of standardized tests. But, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what you've all said. It was a little bit difficult for me because I moved institutions during the pandemic from a big public to a sort of small private. And I think the biggest noticeable thing for me is just sort of the preparation that they came in with, just being completely incapable of sort of completing reading a text and not feeling embarrassed that they didn't do it at all. I think while still maintaining the expectation that there would be sort of a good grade sort of at the end of it. And I think increasing pushback that what I was expecting was unreasonable, and sort of wanting to have a little bit of sort of additional grace or whatever extended to them given the consequences. So, and that can be like a little throwing you off your game a little bit because I'm always checking in back. Am I being unreasonable here? This was this sort of big event, but yeah, I think that demand for sort of greater.
Oh, sorry, Daniel. I wasn't trying to cut you off. I was just trying to get into to ask a question.
No,
that was an accident.
I took the reggae music as my playoff.
God damn! I'm so sorry, man.
You're the Sandman from the Apollo.
Again, I am going to be taking myself off the screen as much as possible because I don't want the show to get taken down because of I have no idea who these people are, and I think it's in Spanish. Oh, is that Shakira? Oh, it's Shakira. But I don't have my glasses on, and she's wearing a very revealing mermaid outfit. And this is
or so you think.
Video. Yeah, it could just be a
Ving
fucking
Rhames.
fish. It could be. My vision
Once again.
is that bad. I'm like, damn, she got a fat ass. Oh, that's just Ving Rhames.
Cooking sausages. Butt ass naked. You thought it was Shakira.
And that's why I'm single. To what extent does the prioritization of standardized metrics in education serve capitalist needs for a functional workforce rather than critical thinkers? Does the shift away from deep reading mirror the broader commodification of time and attention in the current moment that we're in? Who wants to go first? Bert wants to go first.
Yeah.
I can tell. I see it in your eyes, bro.
So, what got me to jump in on this article just in the first place, for anyone who read it, one of the main things, the base here, or the context was elite students, which for most folks, studying education, it was the moment you're on a campus that admits less than 20% of the people who apply, you're on a fairly elite campus that's making you an elite student. And the question was, why can't they read whole books? Getting more to why are they struggling with like 200 pages a week? And the theory that standardized testing played a big role for them was an interesting one for me, because personally, I do think it plays a big role for students broadly. But when you're looking at, over 50% of Harvard students come from public school districts, they're going to be very wealthy districts, probably in the top 20% of the income distribution. And, when it comes to state testing, and I've talked to some the teachers in these areas, I can't talk to all teachers in all 14,000 school districts, but they, at least in the wealthy districts, they don't really have to prepare for the state test the way we often hear when the news is focused on these lower income districts or districts that have other resource issues. They kind of just have a cruising altitude of 75 or 80% or more are just going to get proficient. I felt for the elite students that were the focus of this essay in the Atlantic, that it had more to do with, to Jason's point about the demands of capitalism. I mean, most of these students are competing with each other. They have, your normal 6 to 8, classes a day, but just tons and tons of extracurriculars, to the point where a lot of the students that I was helping with their essays or that I was tutoring, they don't have time to meet with me until 8 p.m. And their extracurriculars are now spanning things from, the traditional stuff of sports, but all the way to they're doing the robotics. There are, there's Math Olympiad, but there's also an investor equivalent to that, where these students are managing simulated portfolios that could have upwards of $1 million in it if the stocks were real. And they have to do all of this to add to the resume. And when I look at them, their schedules just really mirror what I would say are their kind of knowledge worker parents, where it's about how much you can cover. It's not really about depth. It's just a lot of work. It almost has that quarterly cadence where as soon as you knock out one thing, everything just switches. And so I do less the testing and more the demands of they're being prepared to be over. Sorry, I'm hearing the music. I understand how distracting that is. I think they're being prepared basically for the standard Silicon Valley knowledge worker, project manager life, where you're just running through as many projects as you can, limited depth, you just move on.
I want to apologize once again for the music. I'm really not trying to ruin the show with all this music. And again, this is the quietest place that I could be. So I want to again apologize to you guys and thank you guys so much. Ture, I brought this, what Bert said, up to you the other day, and you had said that you're used to that mentality because you yourself were one of these elite high school students, and you said not much has changed on that front.
Well, my assumption is not a lot had changed on that front. I went to 3 different types of high schools, not just 3 different high schools. And one of them was certainly a high school that prepared one for college in an explicit way. Though the first one I attended, and Daniel will tweak this language, I don't know what the right language is, was one of those so-called school to prison pipeline high schools. And there was an interesting juxtaposition between the expectations for students in one of those high schools versus the other, and it is what you would expect. But having said that, I don't teach at an elite university, and so there are elements of this narrative that jumped out at me, particularly as one who is a product of fairly fancy colleges and universities myself. And I've certainly seen with my students great difficulty in reading for sustained argument. But what's interesting about it, and one of the reasons I thought it would be kind of cool to have Daniel on, because of some personal connections that we have to each other, it was that my father, who had taught at the University of Pennsylvania until 2019, he and I would share, sort of teaching war stories. And there was an interesting overlap between the complaints that we each had about our students And while it was a given, or it shouldn't be surprising, that his students were, on the whole, more sophisticated than mine. And I want to be clear that I have wonderful students. There is an unevenness to my student body, which I've always liked. But so our best students would be among the best students anywhere. I always tell my students that the best students I've taught at Illinois State University are as good as the best students that I taught in courses that I had TA'd or GA'd at Columbia University or went to graduate school. And the worst students, weren't terribly different, but the distribution is quite different. The unevenness of the student body that I face, of course, does reflect a degree of sophistication, that my students are a lot less likely to come out of elite high schools. My dad's students were a lot more likely to come out of elite high schools. So his students tended to have come in with the skill sets that you would expect. But in both instances, each of our students had difficulty reading for sustained argument. And again, it is worth noting that my old man retired in 2019, so that's obviously before the COVID pandemic. And it did strike me that one of the things that might have been going on, and there are many things that were going on, were some of the themes that the author of the Atlantic piece explores, which is the move away from reading longer books. Last thing I'll say, because I don't want to prevent others from speaking, so apologies. That issue, as one of the subjects in the article points to, goes back a long way. One of my grad school buddies, who we had TA'd a class together back in the late 90s at Columbia, had remarked that he didn't really learn how to read books until graduate school. And technically that would have been true for me as well, for what he pointed to, that we tended to read, even in college, excerpts, not necessarily the entire book. We might read half of it. We didn't necessarily read the chapter sequentially. We'd read them over time over the course of the semester, and that sort of undercut the capacity to read for sustained argument. In graduate school, by contrast, it was a book a week, so you didn't have a choice but to confront that long argument. This is not a problem that's new. It's a problem that's been compounded, though, and it probably has been compounded to a good extent by the things that Bert said, for sure, but also, as the author points to, a lot of the students who go to elite colleges are coming out of public high schools that may or may not be as insulated against the pressures that shape what we consider the right metrics for whether or not a school is succeeding. And while they may not have been subjected to No Child Left Behind, which maybe would have been better called A Lot of Children Left Behind, or Race to the Top, which might have been better branded as Race to the Bottom. That's a problem, right? I mean, that sentiment about what education is, which is, I think, more about getting a job, which is, I think, one of the things that Bert alluded to, but thinking about your career at a very early age rather than broadening your mind. I think that undercuts the capacity to deliver a quality education that we end up, in high school, that those of us who teach at the college level end up seeing.
Yeah,
Daniel, do you want to?
for sure. I mean, I appreciate sort of both these points. I think they're kind of coming from the same, being generated by the same forces. Actually, both the expansion of test scores, but then this intense focus or perception that the purpose of education is solely or even primarily about getting a job. When you see this sort of big turn in how we think about what education is and should be kind of in the mid 20th century, one of the reasons that you get standardized tests is because there's this perception that schools are not preparing people for the labor market. This comes on the heels of completely inverting the explanation for why people are poor or don't have jobs in the first place. It's no longer a function of sort of the broader labor market. It's a function of the fact that you don't have the individual skills. Once that turn is made and the focus goes to education, you see a huge demand for a focus on tests, in part, one, to make sure that students are actually being prepared. But another big thing is to control teachers, because there's perception the teachers are doing a very poor job of preparing students for the job market. So it's both a way to sort of test students, but also limit the freedom the teachers have in the classroom. And so, Bert, when you talk about the sort of race for sort of credentials that exist at high school, I mean, that same stuff exists sort of at higher education too. And in both institutions that I've been at, it is crazy. I mean, you're talking about triple majors. We had a quadruple major recently, which is an indication that it's not about the content at all, but it's all about competition on sort of the job market and what comes next. And so I really do see these two things as connected. The way that they're expressed may be slightly different in different contexts. And the other thing I think is, in some sense, like, this is a logical and rational consequence of viewing education fundamentally or primarily as means to a job, and fundamentally about preparation for the labor market, and also about differentiation, because the thing about both standardized tests and sort of this race for credentials is one of the things that standardized tests do is sort of produce differentiation. They produce success and they produce failure. Sort of with the credentials, you're looking to give yourself a leg up. That is a product of thinking about education as almost exclusively instrumental, which is perhaps unsurprising that we didn't see that effect trickle down to how students actually approach things like sustained reading for an argument or being able to finish a novel.
Well, I think you do see it a little bit. I think that is the trickling down, isn't it? A little bit, the transactional relationship with any form of knowledge, that you can't actually sustain an interest beyond the immediate incentives of it, the immediate benefit you get from it. You know, the whole the need to always have there be a application. When am I going to use this? I mean, it's kind of interesting because I think a lot of this was just the steady march of progress in the post-war years that just, this has been leading in this direction, and obviously got accelerated with the rise of neoliberalism. But if you think about, in I think it was like 1951 or 2, when the Truman administration, Truman was by no means any sort of radical, but when he convened and you'll have to excuse me, I'm probably the most historically illiterate person here, but when he convened some sort of a panel of experts or some sort of a commission to discuss the benefits and drawbacks of education, the report that was produced increasing, higher education, none of the benefits ever discussed job training, because it's not actually, it's not the purpose of it. And I think that trying to continuously, treat it as such it's just accelerated the distortion. At least that's, what appears very much to have happened. And I think that with the constant need to, when it's noticed, when these issues are noticed, you get, first Clinton's initiatives, then No Child Left Behind, then, Race to the Top, then Common Core, which, funny enough, tried to standardize critical thinking, which at least, from everything I've seen, has been a disaster. But in any case, yeah, I think that.
Daniel,
the
can
job
you?
training piece, is right in Daniel's wheelhouse.
I was actually going to ask. I was going to ask
Sorry.
Daniel before you just wanted to host the show. Jesus fucking Christ, just comes in here. He's got the best hair. He's like, look at me. I piss excellence. I don't need you fucking playing your reggae tone in the background. Daniel, briefly, can you explain Common Core and No Child Left Behind? Because these are things that you hear people say. Yeah. I don't know if a lot of people know what they actually mean and what the implementation looked like and how that became problematic for you guys.
Yeah. I mean, so very simple version. No Child Left Behind is a federal program. The federal government is kind of a secondary player when it comes to the education system. About 93% of funding comes from state and local governments, federal government provides about 7%. But that 7% is really necessary, particularly as states are looking to do budget cuts. So it does give the federal government some leverage to sort of direct curriculum. One of the things that so No Child Left Behind is a reauthorization of the original piece of federal legislation from 1965 that sort of sets the guidelines of what it is that states have to do in order to get this federal funding. Some of the distinctive things about No Child Left Behind was that it set standards that states had to reach in order to continue to receive funding, and it trickled down to the schools themselves. So schools within a certain amount of time, I believe it was 10 years, but it's been a while since I've looked at that bill, had to reach 100% proficiency both in English and math. Basically impossible. And if schools were not proficient, there were a ratcheting up of consequences for failing to meet those proficiency standards. That could include complete shutdown of the school and sort of turning it into a charter. It could be forcing the school to use money to pay for private tutors. It could be firing all of the staff. So these are pretty intense and intense sanctions that could be applied and really had not been applied sort of in the past. I will say ideologically, the shift towards thinking about education as primarily about job training had taken place decades before. I think you really see that turn in the 1960s, and it is kind of about the collapse of a New Deal consensus that jobs should be, people might have a right to a job. The job should be a living wage, and the explanation for why people were unemployed was due to failures in the larger job market. Once that gets abandoned, you start seeing sort of different approaches to education, viewing it as the primary job preparation tool that the federal government is going to help push. That's kind of gets the federal education state kind of oriented around pushing standardized tests as a solution to a host of problems, not only sort of lack of employment, but also racial inequality and a number of other things. So ideologically, the turn really happened, I think, in the 60s, but in terms of specific policies like No Child Left Behind, we really see a ratcheting up of the sanctions and a increase in the effect at the local level by the time you get to 2000. In terms of Common Core, this was an effort that was funded in large part by the Gates Foundation, among others, to try and get states to agree to a set of sort of common standards that students should be able to sort of achieve at by the time that they graduated. So a little bit sort of different origins there, but kind of pushing in the same ideological direction, that what we need to do is hold schools and students accountable and teachers accountable for making sure that students are going to be prepared for the future job market. One last thing, the Department of Education, shortly after it was created in the Carter administration, was almost shut down under the Reagan administration. The way it was saved was the production of this report known as The Nation at Risk, where this report warned that we were at risk of committing national suicide by falling behind, specifically the Germans and the Japanese at that time, in terms of education. And so we needed to focus on increasing our educational standards. I bring that up in part because you start to see very similar language being trotted out now in terms of the Trump administration and renewed attack on the Department of Education. It'll be interesting to see whether or not they can get around.
I mean, isn't that Elon's job right now? Is to say that the Department of Education isn't making any money?
Right. On just because Daniel, I love everybody's points, but like rarely do we get to do education history. This is a rare treat for me. Such a big part of why I jumped on this, and these are points that were said leading up is, they were talking about why can't, elite students read, but just going back to job training and schools and throughout, the Common Core movement, which is the old historical name for how do we get public schools. Anyway, the Common School movement, schools would go up to, what we might consider fourth grade education. There was no concept of job training. The school existed to teach the 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic, and had been successful at that. And then at the start of, the 20th century, it gets being pushed into these other goals, mostly acculturating immigrants coming to America. It's why when you compare our public school system to other public school systems around the world, we have all of these cultural events, like our sports teams happen in the school. We have proms, we have homecoming, all these things built around, well, the school is so good at teaching reading, writing, arithmetic, and giving you the basic skills to vote and read the Bible. Maybe it can also create an American culture. And we thought it did pretty good at that as well. And as time goes on, we just keep adding things that we think the school should be able to do to compensate for other things that other parts of the society can't do. And, say other countries would just create a better social safety net or do other things, but we're just always like, the school will solve it. And
like deal with your badass kids.
And so by the time I get to the Atlantic article and I'm looking at, the scope of what schools are supposed to do, they still have the job of teaching a singular culture. They still have the job of teaching these basic reading and writing skills, but they also have the job of, the government wants good citizens, employers want good workers, the students themselves want some degree of self-actualization, and parents want you to teach their kid how to outcompete other kids. And then we're also like, and the school should fix the fact that we don't read anymore. It should do something about that as well. And just to go through some of those numbers, like you could look up Trinity Day School, you could look up Philip Executor, you can even go back, and this is maybe circling to what Tori's talking about how there's, some similarities between what him and his father were experiencing with students. At these schools, they do maybe 4 or 5 whole books they have folks read in a year because they're very, very elite. But that's not really a preparation for reading 200 to 400 pages a week. Also, when you look at schools, a lot of times this is just English that is having you read this. When you get to college, you start having your history teachers and other folks from other disciplines asking you to do long form reading, which the students have no preparation. But even if you were to go back to, curriculum from 20 years ago where students are reading, maybe they read all of Steinbeck and they get to 10, 14 books in a school year, which is significantly longer than there'll be in any college courses. And we just haven't been expecting the school to prepare students for this reading a whole book a week. That's not what they've done, but something really round this out. We don't read generally as a culture all that often. And I always feel like when I'm looking at what we're adding to schools to do, it's compensating for these other things that have fallen out of our culture elsewhere. There was a point where, in addition to the 14 or so books you maybe read for school each year, sometimes reading was the most interesting thing available to you to do. Youngest millennials, oldest Gen Z kind of got a freebie with like Harry Potter and like Hunger Games and Percy Jackson. There were these little bumps that allowed teachers to get more reading than they would have otherwise. But, going back to Adolph Reed's say, it's not just that, the high school books were getting assigned. It's that students were around people who were reading more frequently, at least. Sometimes it was the most interesting thing you could do. And, this would be the last point. You got to put reading books in context of how our society is imbibing other stories. I mean, if you read Daniel Bessner's piece or other things like that last year, like screenwriters are being told to intentionally write second screen content, things that you're supposed to be able to watch while looking at your phone. Yeah. And that's the level of story and narrative following analysis these students are growing up with. Look at see with their parents, but the school's supposed to come through and get them to read War and Peace. Like, they're a part of our culture at this point. That's a very challenging thing to do.
Can I jump in for a second?
Okay, please do.
In response to a couple of things that Bert said. One, I got to tell you that when I saw commercials for Percy Jackson and the All-Stars or whatever, the film adaptation was. I was really upset that wasn't Black Harry Potter, because I thought Percy Jackson was a brother. So that was very, I assumed he was maybe a British brother, but a brother that's the same. So that was quite the disappointment. But the more serious point is that among the tasks that Bert pointed to that we'd expect schools to do is to prepare decent citizens. I don't think we do that anymore, though. I think after World War II, for sure, there was an expectation that schools would serve that function. But I think subsequently, that's much less of an expectation. And part of the reason that I would suggest that that's much less of an expectation is the emphasis is on STEM and employment. And those two go hand in glove. But it's not on literacy. It's not on history. It's not in the social sciences. It's not in philosophy. It's not the emphasis in education, generally speaking, is not in the stuff that you need to be a responsible citizen in a democratic society. And sometimes it's even crazy Nazi shit like training leaders. I was very surprised many, many years ago, a decade or more ago, when I had come across this push to train leaders, and I'd had students who were involved in an initiative in which leadership was one of the questions they would put to me in a survey, and centered on whether or not our classes were training leaders. And my line to them, and I stand by it to this day, is that we should not be in the business of training leaders, right? Training leaders is what you do if you were training the Hitler Youth. What we're supposed to be in the bit, right? I mean, because and the point that I made to them was that leadership should come, at least in some part, organically from a combination of experience and expertise. And at 18, they have neither. So I can't train that. But what we should be doing is training responsible citizens for a democratic society. And the last thing I'll say on this is an example of what I'm talking about, because there's an interesting class skew in what we expect of college students. During the Obama years, President Obama made a statement that I thought was quite infuriating about education. I mean, maybe there was more than one, but there's one that I'll point to specifically, where he said, among other things, folks, you probably don't want to major in art history. Oh, my bad. Got to do this right. But anyway, so got to top that off. I do a better job standing up, to be clear. But anyway, and I was surprised, or I was outraged, because I felt quite confident, and I shared this anecdote with Brianna Joy Gray when I had brought her out here in 2019, who was an art history major at Harvard. But I was surprised or stunned or outraged, I should say, that he made that point, because I would bet cash money that he went to Harvard Law School with more art history majors than he had kinesiology majors, or dare I say criminal justice majors, because criminal justice isn't pre-law, and pre-law went away as a dedicated major when I was in high school. So even if it were, that wouldn't be preparing you for law school. Obama did not mean, here's my wrap-up point, that the people who go to elite colleges shouldn't major in art history. He meant the people who go to colleges like where I teach, or when Daniel was at Ohio University when he taught there, they should not major in art history, because art history does give you the skill set that you need to go to law school, because it trains you to read for sustained argument. It pushes analytical thinking and problem solving, as well as some rote memorization. But again, there's this funky class skew that is shaped, of course, by a push for job training to treat college as white-collar vocational tech. But for people who are part of the nation's leadership class, they are, and those are people who go to elite colleges, or at least presumably, they are afforded an opportunity, or we should expect them to learn broadly, even though humanities majors, as I understand it, and social science majors have declined at those institutions as well. But anyway, so I will stop there because I don't want to hog the mic anymore. Sorry.
Well, I wanted to jump in. That it's interesting you mentioned that, because if you think about the tradition, if you think about the most generically sort of traditionally groomed elite, it was in the UK. It's within the UK, the Oxbridge educated, classics, majors. They all get firsts in classics, and actually within that within that class, it's generally frowned upon. At least I heard somewhere. I heard in one of the interviews. I think it was on Current Affairs, that essentially there's a culture of basically looking down upon the majors, or things with much more of a tangible side to them, essentially because, well, I think among other things, it's my belief is that they don't see it as much of a it doesn't demonstrate or signal the ability to think critically in the way that they value. And also, the way you mentioned STEM, Person made that joke about coming at me, but I do think that's an interesting problem that we have, in that how we actually approach these things. Because obviously there's the cultural representation of STEM, but the way that we're generally approaching it, and this does end up having knock-on effects even within how people in the fields themselves operate. But I, during my brief life, have already noticed a more disjointed approach. The general epistemology becoming one that is, within most people, becoming a little bit less, coherent of an overarching narrative or worldview, rather than instead a bunch of much more atomized things. And I think that it affects how a lot of the people that go into these fields end up sort of like in a sort of like semi-amnesiac way, blanking the slate at the beginning of each term as though nothing had happened before. And I think that that I don't want to over prescribe that that's a cause of anything, but I do think that mirrors a lot of the way that people end up thinking, and how we how in parallel we also have gotten much worse at for example learning languages or other sort of things that require you to develop to make these sort of long-term connections. I'm not gonna beat that drum anymore. So
well, and the point about STEM, just to be clear, is that that's an intellectual pursuit, but the way that people or the sciences are very clearly an intellectual pursuit, but the way that we talk about STEM culturally, and this certainly at least goes back to the Cold War, right? Because even when I was in school in Southwest Atlanta, Georgia, we were all being told as kids in the late 70s through the mid 80s, grade school kids, that we needed to focus on engineering, because no one said because they're of the Cold War, but practically what was left of the Cold War certainly would ensure that we could get jobs at Boeing if we or Raytheon or Lockheed Martin or whatever. But again, a way that, even though STEM is clearly an academic set of disciplines, the way that we talk about it culturally and politically, it's accounting, it's kinesiology. These are fields that directly lead to a job. It's pre-law, as well in that front. Unlike history, philosophy, political science, sociology, anthropology, English, all of which train you to read and think critically about the world. They encourage problem solving. They confer skill sets that hypothetically could transcend multiple careers, but fundamentally it serves the function of preparing citizens to live in a democratic society. And that last piece is gone. Nobody gives a fuck about training citizens to live, not even liberals, right? Because Obama's race to the top is a case in point. And unfortunately, and I've seen this from too many angles, it has been the case at the very least since the Bush administration. I think it might go back further than that the push for education reform that's undermining education in the capacity of particularly lower income children, but children to get a quality education, is often wrapped in a perverse language of racial justice. And I'll give you one example in the state of Illinois, what I'm talking about. A former governor, so this is safe for me to say this because he's no longer my governor, right? Had launched an attack on Chicago State University, which is not an HBCU, but it's a Black majority college, right? And that governor, who was kind of Illinois' version of Scott Walker, but he was a billionaire himself, had made the case that because Chicago State had a pretty low 6-year graduation rate, that the problem was, and this should sound very familiar, the problem was that that university was squeezing predominantly Black students with high administrative costs, that it had a hefty layer of administrative fat that was ratcheting up the cost of tuition and undercutting, which was undercutting in some sometimes unspecified ways, the ability of those students to graduate in 4 years or 4 to 6 years. And of course, it had not come up in this mix, right? So this is a perverse way to squeeze out a publicly funded university. But what didn't come up is that the students at Chicago State tend to be working class and often poor and are working jobs while they're in school. So one of the things that was retarding their progress through the curriculum, making it more difficult for those students to get out in 4 to 6 years, is the fact that this state, like many others since the 70s, has consistently lowered or reduced its contributions to public universities, resulting in rising tuition costs, which is pushing students, of course, to take out student loan debt. And we know what that means, but also many of them just have to work to be in school, which is going to make it a lot more difficult to graduate in 4 to 6 years. That was off the table. And again, I just want to stress this in case it got lost in my blather, that they used the perversely and cynically use the language of racial justice to undercut the ability of these of the students at this Black majority university to get a quality education.
Yeah. Can I pick up on a couple of points here? I mean, I think, well, that certainly you see very similar sort of moves being pulled when it comes to sort of the push for privatization in charter school. The big justification for this is we have to do something to help poor and Black students in this failing public monopoly. That has been the argument for a long time. Another thing I want to pick up on is it is so interesting when you hear repeated arguments sort of to focus on STEM, and it can come up a lot of different ways. I think in the Obama administration, I think probably in the Biden administration too, you'll hear everybody needs to learn how to code. But I mean, if you take a step back and just think about it from an economic perspective, training everybody to code would not necessarily, or would not lead to everybody having a good paying job. In fact, it would decrease the wages that you would pay because it would increase supply so much. So even that argument is really sort of tied up with something that's not going to be in the best interest of sort of the population more broadly, in part because education is not going to be how you, it might work for individual circumstances, it might improve your individual economic standing, but from a systemic level, what you do in K through 12 is not going to change the availability and the conditions of the jobs that exist more broadly. So it's that sort of perverse sort of ideology there as well. I also want to say on the leadership front, one of the things that I've been seeing, and also sort of tied to Ray's point about the fact that nobody cares about the civic side at all anymore, is that I was looking at a case recently out of Arizona where their charter school board just recently approved a charter school that is based on a 2-hour learning model. And what this is give sort of all teachers, the curriculum is set and the students are taught by AI for 2 hours a day. And then the rest of the day is spent with what's known as guides and training, like things like life skills, entrepreneurship, public speaking. And some of the language that is used is just totally gives away the game in a way that even I was kind of shocked at how far they're willing to go. I just want to read some from the actual application of this charter school. So the founders of Unbound Academic Institute began with opening a high-end private school, Alpha, for the same reason Elon Musk started with higher-end Teslas, to create a product that generates insights and funding for future development. And when it came to the job ad itself for teacher guides that were going to be leading these kids, replacing standard teachers, they said, this is what they're asking for in their applications. Think of yourself as a brand consultant for 50 startups simultaneously, guiding diverse branding needs from business to personal expertise positioning. And the guides are also supposed to have expertise in social media management, content creation, audience engagement. This was approved by the Arizona State Board. This same company operates charter schools in Texas and Florida, and has application in Arkansas and a couple other states as well. So increasingly it is mask off about what actually is happening. And I think it is, I would just sort of totally echo Jeray's point. There is no even real pretense that preparing people for sort of citizenship is even part of what sort of the political parties are expecting public education to do. I mean, they may say it, but policy-wise, there really isn't any indication that that's the case.
This is why they love STEM, isn't it? Because I mean, STEM is. I mean, look, obviously, I've defended my own, my own general field, but I mean, I will say it is also the one field where you can get somebody to, it's a field where there's, sub disciplines where you can absolutely get people there by essentially with just, automated processes of teaching. Sometimes, I mean, if you won't do a great job, they won't be great at it, but it's where it's the area where because it's objective, you can just do it sort of factually. I think one of the other things to sort of go off of what I think a few of you said, I know that Tori mentioned this, but there's a perversity to it, because these fields are also ones where you have a little bit more where your background can play a little bit much more of a role, where your the strength of the background can really create longer term stratification down the road. So it kind of serves within the whole meritocratic argument sometimes to, if you overvalue the STEM fields, it can serve to sort of reinforce the pre-existing, the pre-existing background that students are given, essentially, to overvalue that. I mean, I think obviously there's a lot of other things that would be, that would lead to discrepancies, but I think that it's really worth mentioning that this is the sort of thing it's the same kind of spirit, albeit with a different focus behind the kind of self-justifying aristocratic thing in the UK, aristocratic values of education in the UK. Anyways, but yeah, the AI thing really does sound, it sounds like just out of a dystopian novel. I mean, I had no idea they were there yet.
I want to throw out there that, part of why I even wanted to say anything about this was because so often when I do hear folks writing about students, there is, I don't think it's really been on this panel, and Ture was very careful to say that he has smart students, and the best students there would be the best at other places. A lot of these students have taken on extracurriculars starting from very young that require them to develop all sorts of leadership skills. There's a thing called Blue Ocean, where it's thousands of competitors who all do entrepreneurial pitching. They're learning how to build a company. I have other students who've competed to go to Wharton, and their portfolio contains starting nonprofits and charities and things like that. But a lot of it is aimed towards the entrepreneurial, and these students can learn very well how to do the things that we ask of them. But the schools really, they don't have all the components that people think they do. To this point about leadership, I'm always fascinated when schools come up that people imagine that it's this system that's being run by the top down, or if you have, you know, the conservative nightmare, it's the Department of Education is telling everybody what to do. It is, again, this 14,000 school districts. Each of those districts could have at least 3 schools in the elementary and middle and a high school. There isn't a U.S. Department of Education like CIA or FBI that's out there enforcing any of the things they say. They just have a gentleman's agreement. Like, if you want this extra federal money, which they do want, they need, for all the reasons Daniel pointed out, then, you know, please do your best to subscribe to these guidelines. But there's no one checking each of these individual schools. There is so much in this system that is really individual that makes it very difficult to say like what everybody is doing at once. But the reason I bring up all of that fragmentation and all of that division that sometimes the public gets to hear about with school board fights, or when they do hear that it's actually really expensive to publish textbooks. So the smaller states around Texas just get whatever textbook Texas sends to the publisher because it's cheaper to get their copy. That all of that creates a situation where it's just easier to not ask the school to do anything, words dictate me, but remotely ideological, to stay as far away from politics, civic engagement, what the right way to be a citizen is. And if you do that at all, you only do it if you're in a very, very small bubble where you know everyone basically agrees with what a good citizen is. But for the most part, a lot of schools have just kind of bowed out of doing anything that's going to create friction among all of these different populations they serve. And so, you know, the idea of cultivating a leader, you'd have to have a very strong stance on like what a good leader is. Obviously, I think the points you said about the Third Reich make a lot of sense. They shouldn't be doing leaders. But even when you get to what's a good citizen, the way that divides is just so big. And yeah, schools end up, just to save themselves, I guess, in their mind, the headache, they steer away from anything where they're going to have different sets of parents saying, hey, I don't think you should be teaching my kid that this is what a good person does. They don't want it, at least in public schools a lot of times.
Well, and I wouldn't make a case that I wouldn't expect that much in public high schools. You know, the extent to which I got something that seemed to be on the spectrum of training me to be a responsible citizen in high school, or in high school, or in school maybe generally, was when I was in private school and at home, right? I mean, but those were the two avenues for it. It wasn't public school, and in part because the first high school I went to was really very much kind of a warehouse. Except for when I was also in performing and visual arts high school, but that's a different thing altogether. But what I say in college, you know, I'm not interested in training people to be good people because I don't know what that means, right? I mean, because we all have our own take on that. What I'm interested in, and what I think should be done, for what it's worth, is exposing students to ideas that people have had. You know, I'm saying this as a historian. Yeah. About what a good society would look like, right? And you expose people as an American historian to the differences in the parameters of what a good society would look like in the late 1700s or somewhere between 1830 and 1860 and so forth. And what you're going to see is change over time and debates about what a good society would look like. And that's the kind of thing that stimulates young people, or any of us, to think about, to embrace the reality that the parameters of the feasible are plastic, right? I mean, it's not a one size fits all for what constitutes a right or righteous position. Those things are contingent, and they are shaped, of course, by the power dynamics of one time versus another. But the debate should push people, hopefully, without saying this is what you're doing, to interrogate, you know, what democracy is, right? And
if you ask ChatGPT to explain that to me in simpler words,
well, I mean,
actually hear thoughts getting pretty good
about AI and the like, but I can't think and listen to Jason's music at the same time.
Dude, this has been really hard. You guys are saying great shit. And now the music is pivoted from reggaeton to like this weird Latin emo pop that is equally as gross to my ears. So
I'm so glad coding came up. No, I just want to say I'm so glad that coding came up because
Yeah.
I used to think about that like a year ago. That does anyone remember when we thought we were going to get all of the kids to code? Do you remember
Yes.
that?
Yeah.
Yes, I do remember that. I
And
do remember
now
that.
it actually seems like a pretty cool stroke of luck that we didn't succeed at that, since AI is going to take all the mid-tier coding jobs. So, that worked out. Jason has
Yeah,
very
it's true. It's true.
Chanel hip glasses on.
Jason Cinema.
Do these glasses look like girl boss glasses for real?
You look like a
Yes.
manic pixie dream girl.
Hey,
What?
Daniel, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
School to prison pipeline as a phrase is not the best way to describe those kinds of schools, from what I
Yeah.
gather from you and Sarah Kate. So,
Yeah.
what's the
Yeah.
best term for that? Because
I
I
mean,
can stop using it as a shorthand.
It is hard. I think part of like what our reaction to it is what all of the shorthand has sort of led to, sort of policy wise. And in terms of the short, I mean, it's tough because there are schools that, like we were looking at a case down in Mississippi where it legitimately seems to look like they are directly sending kids from school to prisons. So there's not denying that sort of relationship exists. But I think one of the things that sort of drawing that or sort of using that metaphor is it kind of gets rid of all of the complexity, which is of course the purpose of the metaphor. But it also suggests that the reason that kids are in prison is largely due to schools. It's not due to sort of criminal justice policy. It also tends to sort of set schools up for greater attacks at a time when, as we've all discussed for various reasons, they're under attack from a lot of other sources. Weirdly, if you look at a lot of the literature, it seems to suggest that the reason that a lot of the suggestion for school to prison pipeline, there's really no concrete statistical evidence for it. It's sort of this suggested future outcome of people being less educated. So, which again sort of tends to reinforce this idea that it's personal responsibility or something about the individual themselves that explains why they end up in jail, or that sort of their past experience that explains why they end up in jail, rather than the fact that sort of we have pursued a policy of locking up a tremendous amount of people for basically no reason at all, or for very minor infractions. So I think we have not come up with a pithy metaphor to sort of explain that relationship, in part because I think maybe the pithy metaphor is part of the problem.
Yeah. Well, and so when people use that expression, and what they're often saying is that the school is preparing them for prison in a direct way.
Your school didn't prepare you for prison? You didn't watch Penitentiary over and over again to learn how to fucking stop the butt rape?
I did watch Penitentiary, and the fact that I saw Penitentiary around the same time that Ernie Hudson played the lovable Winston in Ghostbusters at the same time, roughly, that he was trying to rape Leon Isaac Kennedy was really quite the mindfuck. But the reason that that I often fall back on that to describe that first high school I went to for a couple of years is less that it seemed to be preparing people to go to prison, though there seemed to be an expectation that some large percentage of the student body, which was predominantly Black and Puerto Rican and lower income, would find their way into prison. And it was more that it was a run like a prison, or at least what I thought a prison would be like, because it was very much overcrowded, right? I mean, we took, on its own terms, it was overcrowded. And I think one of the 3 schools in New Haven, public high schools, closed at the end of my first year. So the 2 remaining got the spillover. And the principal, told us, I think my second year, that this is the shit you got away with last year that you're not going to get away with this year. And everything was draconian, just to sum that up as succinctly as possible. So we weren't being, thanks to tracking, some of us did get, or were capable of getting, a quality education. And the tracking was very much class skewed. But because of the demographics, of course, the upper echelon was disproportionately white, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes perfect sense. I would say, maybe one thing in response to that is that, well, you can have a school that feels like a prison without also subsequently leading to prison. And I think part of the problem is sort of that suggested connection, because what it tends to do is obscure any type of broader economic analysis of why both of those institutions are like that in the first place. And so then you get, well, the way we fix the school to prison pipeline is we just tweak a little bit of education policy and then we can sort of solve it. And that tweak in education policy begins to look like, we just need to get rid of public schools. We need to
stop telling those kids to have babies. Stop telling babies. Tell babies to stop making babies, as Jesse Jackson would have said.
Yeah,
and
that's a joke. A lot of classes, and I just replay Bill Cosby's pound cake speech on full volume, and that tends to fix a lot of problems.
Fair.
Right.
Well, I don't want to ask you guys this in the champagne room, so don't answer right now. No, I've been trying to fucking pivot to the champagne room, but fucking
my bad.
Chatty Cathy over here. Just
I had a question for
chatting.
Daniel. I'm sorry.
We asked that behind a paywall, Ray. Goddamn.
We can elaborate on it for
I don't have a fucking fancy Japanese screen behind me, Ray. I took a bus for 22 pesos that I had to scrounge for under my couch.
What do you think that screen costs, man? Fancy? I mean, it's not a bad screen, but I think it's in your budget.
Yes.
Hey, I
think it was $40 or something.
I blew
$40, Jason.
That's a lot of money for me, Bert Cooper. $40? That's a weird.
You had $46 for those glasses, bro.
No, I didn't. These were $20 on iBuyDirect. So
the rest of your outfits from Shein.
Oh, dude, no, the rest of my outfits from like fucking what do you call these places here? The flea markets here. You get clothes for like $1. Oh shit, I shouldn't have said that. The clothes are hell of expensive here. Don't come here. Hipsters go home. Shit.
You ruined it for everybody.
I did. You know what's funny?
Go to Rosarito.
I will say this. Shut up. Don't tell them where I live. There were these white people at the cafe that I usually go to the other day, and they were like super fucking hipsters, and they were like looking at the thrift store, and I was like, fuck, dude, if they tell their friends that this place is here, the prices are going to double overnight. Like, we have to fight. We have to stop them.
Like with the avocados. I see what you're getting at.
Right. You can't let people know. So everything I buy is in the States, and I sell kidneys for it. So that's how I got these glasses.
So no more pre-paywall questions, because I did have one.
Let's save it because I need to get more glasses.
Could the question serve as a tease that the answer would come behind the paywall, but you could?
I've been wanting to
tease
stuff, but you guys are so quick to answer shit. You're so happy someone's asking you a question that doesn't suck because your kids suck. Like, let's just admit it. You guys students suck. That was originally the first question. Like, are the kids really not reading, or are they just retarded? Like, that was the original. And I was like,
thank you. Good night.
But what were you going to ask, Bert?
I rarely do I have, distinguished education folks all around me that I can bother. I'm curious, I understand from the Atlantic's point of view what the loss of reading as, this pastime, as this marker means. And they had some follow-ups to that article where you got to hear a lot of the people at the Atlantic more or less wax poetic about the fact that they're readers themselves. They could all name the book that maybe changed their life, or that they felt nourished throughout high school. But I'm curious what you all think reading is in terms of a metric relevant to just why specifically focus on this. I mean, we have the idea of students being developed in the classic liberal sense, but it's also the ability to follow a narrative, and that's politically meaningful. But I mean, I'm curious how many people outside the Atlantic Circle who are just like, the kids can't read, everything's going to shit. I'm interested if this represents a real, loss to something that you all care about beyond, a beloved pastime. Because realistically speaking, in terms of leisure time, I mean, even if I can get the 17-year-old to fall in love with Tolstoy, they're not going to be given a work schedule to where they're going to be reading a book a week. I'm going to get them to fall in love with something that no employer is ever going to give them time to do again. So I'm interested, does this represent a loss? to you or something you that matters to you?
Do you want to answer that real quick, Antonio? Then we'll let the rest of the guys answer in the champagne.
Yeah, it's probably the one who reads least these days. And here, yes. That has less to do with work, more to do with with kids. But I'd say that it does represent the loss of something serious. But I think that a lot of the time, when they talk about it as a sort of moral deficit, like a lack of intellectual grit or whatever. I think that in general, it doesn't really represent a loss necessarily of intellectual curiosity, but I do think it does represent a loss of the attention, the ability to really maintain focus on a narrative or idea for an extended period of time. It does, I think, also kind of represent a shift away from certain sort of commonly accepted general, the death of sort of like a general shared knowledge with a certain class. And I do feel like it does end up creating something that, or a way of thinking, maybe this is completely conjectural, but I think it does kind of herald a change of thinking in a direction that to most of us is somewhat alien. It doesn't necessarily, we can't really necessarily say the precise way it goes, but we have a general feeling, and it does represent the end of something, and definitely the end of the and I think also I do think reading is incredibly important, and the ability to immerse yourself, I think there's losses there that I can't really put into words.
Fair enough. I'll also ask these guys the question that you all really want to know is, how does cell phones affect the classroom in this new modern era? And what the big thing that I want to ask these guys about, because I didn't know originally that we were going to have non-Black people on, because I got an email from Antonio and it said he worked at Howard. So I just assumed Antonio. I didn't know.
Well, you do know those Afrocentrists that say that Black people are the real Jews?
Oh, the Israelites?
Hebrew Israelites.
Man. Are you an Israelite?
I'm... am I a Black Hebrew? I was just going to say, well, if I just say yes and vice versa, then by that same token, but no, I'm not. I did encounter them when I was living in New York.
On 34th Street.
They're in Philly and LA as well.
Yeah.
Last time I was in Philly in 2010, I saw
Dude, they're all over the Bay.
him.
Them fools saw me in San Francisco.
Did they make you? Did they demand you put on the tefillin? Or
they have been hitting up this show for at least 3 years, and it wouldn't be fun. I mean, it would be fun, but not for them. So that, and then it wouldn't be fun for me because a lot of them are in the places that I'm from, and I'm not trying to get my ass kicked over some fucking God joke.
I don't know if they're really the ass kicking type.
I don't want to find out. I don't want to find out. Right? I don't roll with a crew anymore. I'm by myself. I'm not.
I don't know what they were like a decade ago, but the ones I walk past, I see them getting screaming matches about whether or not the Ubuntu or the original first people, the Old Testament. It's like I think they mostly just want to waste your time.
Check this out. I'm not trying to be the one that they want to make an example of, and they team up with the Nation of Islam, and I got all these angry Negroes kicking my ass. KRS-One jumps in and kicks me in the nuts. That's not really how I'm trying to spend my few hours I have in the Bay Area, pissing off more people. I already have babies' mothers that can't stand me. Now I got all the nigga that don't want to see me. Fuck that shit. So I do, and I also, what I really want to ask you guys about behind a paywall is how you feel about Snoop Dogg and Nelly performing for Donald Trump and his inauguration. And I have a clip of one of your favorite people, Bert Cooper, Charlemagne the God.
I fucking hate that.
I know.
Great. Cool. Can't wait. Total bonus.
And, it's Bert and Teray, more so Bert, on the main show is professional because he is a professional. Behind a paywall, he is a lot more fun. Will Daniel Moak be more fun behind a paywall when he knows the administration won't see? Those motherfuckers aren't paying fucking.
I mean, I got tenure too, so yeah.
Oh, you got tenure? Oh,
Yeah.
fuck
Yeah.
yeah. Do some crazy shit.
Jason, I'm still on an upward trajectory. Maybe when I hit where you're at, I'll just throw
the
caution.
bottom.
When I gotta flee a state, maybe I'll just be like, fuck it, I'll say whatever I want. Until then, I'm still gunning to be the next Jake from State Farm. Like, that is still the plan.
Ooh, you can.
And you got to move where I am because I live in State Farm's headquarters.
Oh wow, yeah, that's where they find all the
Put
models.
in a good word for me. I think we could both.
I got
do
a
it.
friend. Like, if you did want to move out here, I know people for real.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
Just don't
Your money would go far.
Don't look. He sounds like your money will go further. Bert.
Yeah.
One of my
Bernie.
boys moved back here from Los Angeles. His money's going real far.
You hear that?
He's from
My
Illinois,
paper
though.
could be
He's from
long,
Illinois.
Jason. My paper could be long again.
If you moved here, your paper, your dick, everything will be long as fuck.
And that is the good as shit that you say behind the paywall if you ever want syndication.
And again, we could have the longest conversation about the meeting I had with Means TV and what they said to me. It wasn't about me cursing, but I'll tell you, it's funny. But no, it was good. It was a good meeting. So if you guys want to join us in the Champagne Room, the link's already up. If you are a paid YouTube subscriber, the link is already up. But if you want to dip your toe into the deep end of the debauchery that goes on in the Champagne Room, guess what? It's free. There's a free trial offer. You can try it out. You can put just the tip in, right?
Ooh,
just the tip in. If you like it, if it feels good, you can go full hog in there and pay as little as $2 a month or $30 for the year and become a patron. Who else is selling their patronage with dick jokes?
Now, if
Just me.
my dad ends up watching this, he's going to take me. I think Jason was drunk again. And then I'm going to have to tell him or hire someone. Jason does not drink nor does he do drugs. He's high on life.
He's just regular tarded. Just regular tarded. So, thank you guys. Antonio, seriously, thank you so much for hitting me up. Teray, thank you so much for bringing Daniel on. Daniel, I don't invite you enough on the show. It's not racism. It's just my stupidity.
I mean, if you say so, yeah.
Playing the part of Bill Burr, Daniel Moore.
I emailed you guys all the link to the Champagne Room.
Yep.
Check your emails. Bert, are you going to be able to join us for a little bit?
Thank you.
I really want to see what you have to say about this Charlemagne piece, Bert. So thank you guys. And we are